She stood over my son's open casket and checked her watch. She wasn't looking at his face with love. She was looking at the time with impatience. She thought she had won the lottery. She thought she was finally free with $75 million. She didn't know that the corpse in the box was listening to every single word, and she certainly didn't expect him to talk back. If you believe that karma always arrives on time, hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments, what's the biggest lie you've ever caught someone telling? The rain in Chicago doesn't just fall. It assaults. It has a way of finding the gaps in the masonry, the hairline cracks in the pavement, and soaking straight into the city's bones. Tonight it felt personal. It was a cold, relentless November downpour that turned the streetlights into blurry, weeping sores against the charcoal sky. I sat in my recliner, the leather worn smooth by years of shifting weight, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My name is Arthur Miller. People call me Art. At 68, I feel every mile of the 2 million I've driven. The wind howled, rattling the aluminum siding of my bungalow. It sounded like a rig straining uphill in a low gear. I knew that sound. For 40 years, my world was defined by torque, asphalt, and the white line. I started with one beat-up rig, hauling lumber when I was too young to know better, and too stubborn to quit. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I slept in rest stops that smelled of pine disinfectant and diesel fumes more often than I slept beside my wife. God rest her soul. But I understood load-bearing. I understood that if you distribute the weight correctly, you can carry the world. I built Miller Logistics from the ground up, from a single cab to a fleet of 200 trucks and a warehouse the size of a football field. I built it so my son Michael wouldn't have to ruin his back or grease his knuckles. I sold the business to him 5 years ago. Michael? He was a good boy, smarter than me. He took my sweat and turned it into algorithms. He took the company public. He made $75 million in a single morning when the IPO launched. He moved from this neighborhood of brick bungalows to the Gold Coast, into a mansion with marble floors that echoed when you walked on them. I was proud, but a father knows when the engine doesn't sound right. Money that fast, that thick, it acts like blood in the water. It changes the ecosystem around you. It attracts predators. And the biggest shark of them all was the woman sleeping in his bed. Sarah. I sat there in the dark, listening to the house settle, feeling the old ache in my knees. I didn't know it yet, but the structural integrity of my life was about to be tested past its breaking point. I didn't know how sharp her teeth really were. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. It's a specific kind of sound at that hour. It's not a notification. It's an alarm. It cuts through the silence like a glass bottle breaking on a concrete floor. I stared at it for a full second before my hand shot out. You don't get calls at 2:14 a.m. for a lottery win? Mr. Miller? The voice was unrecognizable, heavy, clipped, professional. The voice of a man who delivers bad news for a living. Speaking. This is Officer Reynolds with the Highway Patrol. I need you to come to St. Luke's Hospital immediately. The air left the room. My hand tightened on the receiver, my knuckles turning white. I felt a phantom vibration, like a drive shaft snapping at 70 miles an hour. Yeah, it's about your son. My heart didn't break. It simply stopped beating. For a moment I was suspended in a vacuum. Is he alive? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. He's in critical condition, sir. You need to hurry. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the side table, dangling by its cord. I grabbed my keys. I didn't bother with a coat, though the damp chill was already seeping through my flannel shirt. I ran out to my old Ford pickup. It was the first new truck I ever bought. A '98. It smelled of old leather, stale tobacco, and diesel. The smell of work. I drove fast. Too fast. The wipers slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The city lights smeared across the windshield like streaks of violent paint. Every red light looked like a warning I was ignoring. I'm not a religious man. I hadn't prayed since my wife passed 20 years ago. I figured God and I had an understanding. I'd stay out of his way if he stayed out of mine. But I prayed then. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands cramped. Don't take him. He's the only thing I built that matters. Take me. I'm old parts. I'm scrap. Not him. St. Luke's Hospital loomed out of the rain like a fortress. When I walked through the sliding doors, the smell hit me first. It's a specific cocktail you never forget. Industrial floor wax, rubbing alcohol, and the metallic tang of fear. I hated hospitals. They were places where strong men went to wither, where the machinery of the body finally failed. I ran to the waiting room. Sarah was there. My daughter-in-law. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the black rain. She was wearing a silk robe with a trench coat thrown hastily over it. Her blonde hair was messy, but not the messiness of panic. It was the calculated disarray of a magazine spread. I stopped 10 feet away. I watched her. She was checking her reflection in the darkened glass. She smoothed her eyebrows with a pinky finger. She adjusted the collar of her coat to show just the right amount of vulnerability. She wasn't grieving, she was rehearsing. When she saw me in the furfizz, she spun around. The transformation was instantaneous. Her face crumpled. It was like watching a switch flip, or an actress waiting for the director to yell action. "Art," she screamed. "Oh, art. It's horrible." She threw her arms around me. I stood stiff as a board, my arms pinned to my sides. She smelled of expensive perfume, something floral and sharp that cost more than a transmission rebuild. It masked everything else, but it couldn't mask the coldness radiating off her. I didn't hug her back. I knew Sarah. I knew her when she was a consultant hired to help with the company branding. I watched her claw her way into Michael's life, methodically isolating him from his friends, spending his money on jewelry that weighed down her wrists. She treated me like the hired help, like grease under her fingernails. "Where is he?" I asked, pulling away from her. "I needed to see him. I needed to verify the damage. The doctors are with him," she sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue that remained pristine. "He drove the Porsche tonight. It was raining so hard. I told him not to go out. I begged him. Why did he go out?" I asked. My voice was low, dangerous. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a micropause that a layman might miss. But I've spent my life listening for the hesitation between gears. "Business," she said, her voice trembling. "He was stressed about the merger. He just stormed out. Lies. Michael never let business ruin his temper. He was steady. He was an engineer of deals. He didn't storm. He calculated." The pneumatic doors to the ICU whooshed open. Dr. Evans walked out. I knew Evans. I had fixed the transmission on his old Honda Civic years ago when he was a resident drowning in student loans. He was a good mechanic of the human body, a straight shooter. "Art?" Dr. Evans said. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deep and dark. He looked at Sarah, then he looked at me. There was a flicker in his eyes, a signal I couldn't quite read yet. "Come with me, both of you." We followed him down the long white hallway. The only sound was the squeak of Sarah's designer slippers on the linoleum and the heavy thud of my work boots. We entered a private room at the end of the hall. Michael was lying in the bed. He looked terrible. His face was a map of violence, bruised purple and yellow. His left arm was casted and elevated, but the worst was the sound. A mission was breathing for him, a rhythmic hiss-click that filled the silence like a metronome, counting down time. Sarah gasped, a theatrical, sharp intake of air. She put a hand to her mouth. "We've done all we can," Dr. Evans said softly, looking at his clipboard rather than at us. "There is severe swelling in the brain. His heart is weak. It's only a matter of time." Sarah let out a wail that sounded practiced. She rushed to the bedside, grabbing Michael's limp hand with both of hers. "No, Michael, don't leave me," she cried, her voice pitching up. "We have so much to live for. We were going to Paris next week. You can't leave me alone." I stood at the foot of the bed. I felt like the roof of the world had collapsed on me. I watched my son. And then I watched her. She was burying her face in the sheets, her shoulders shaking with simulated sobs. But I saw it. I saw her eyes peek up over the linens. She looked at the heart monitor. She wasn't looking at the lines with hope. She wasn't praying for a spike in activity. She was looking at it with impatience. She was checking the time. She was waiting for the line to go flat so the bank accounts would open. She wasn't praying. She was counting seconds. "I need a moment," Sarah said suddenly, straightening up. The tears vanished as quickly as they had appeared. I need to call my mother. I need support. I can't do this alone. Of course, Dr. Evans said, stepping aside. She walked out of the room. She didn't look back at her dying husband. She didn't squeeze his hand one last time. The moment the door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. I watched through the small glass window in the door. Sarah didn't lift the phone to her ear. She stopped just outside. The glow of her phone screen illuminated her face in the dim hallway. I saw her thumbs flying across the screen, texting, fast, and then she smiled. It was a small, cold smile, a smile of victory, a predator realizing the trap had sprung. I looked at Dr. Evans. He was watching me. Then he did something that stopped my breath. He walked over to the door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound in the room. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" I asked, my fists clenching. He turned back to the bed. He reached for the monitor. He flipped a switch. The beeping stopped. The rhythmic hissing ceased. "Is she gone?" a voice whispered. I jumped, nearly hitting the ceiling. Michael opened his eyes. "Michael," I gasped. I stumbled to the side of the bed, my legs feeling like jelly. I grabbed his hand. It wasn't limp anymore. It was warm. His grip was weak, but it was real. "Dad?" he croaked. His voice was rough, like he'd swallowed sand. But he was awake. His eyes were clear. "What is this?" I asked, looking wildly from Michael to Evans. "You said he was dying. You said his brain—" "He's banged up," Evans said, his voice dropping the professional somberness. "Concussion, broken arm, 3 cracked ribs. But he's not dying. Not tonight." "Why the lie?" I demanded. My brain was trying to reconfigure the reality I was standing in. Michael squeezed my hand. His eyes filled with tears. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of betrayal. "Because she tried to kill me, Dad." The words hung in the sterile air like smoke. "What? The brakes?" Michael whispered. He tried to sit up, but winced, settling back against the pillows. I was driving on the ridge road. I hit the pedal for the hairpin turn. And nothing. He took a shaky breath, reliving the terror. It went to the floor. No resistance. Just air. I downshifted. I pulled the emergency brake. I managed to slow it down enough to crash into the guardrail instead of going over. If I hadn't, I would have gone over the cliff. It's a 300-foot drop. Maybe it was a mechanical failure, I said. My mind was rejecting the horror of it. I knew trucks. Things broke. A master cylinder failure, a line rupture. "I checked the car last week," Michael said. "It was perfect. I maintained that car like you taught me to maintain the rigs." He nodded to the bedside table. Dr. Evans reached into a drawer and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. "She dropped them," Michael said, his voice trembling with rage. "I found them in the driveway yesterday. I thought maybe she was gardening. I didn't want to think." He closed his eyes. "But tonight, when the pedal hit the floor, I knew exactly what she had done." My blood, which had been cold with shock, suddenly turned into lava. The structural engineer in me saw the collapse. The foundation was rotten. "We call the police," I said, reaching for my phone. "Right now, we bury her under the jail." "Not yet," Michael said. He opened his eyes. They were hard now. The eyes of the man who made $75 million in a day. "Why?" I asked. "She tried to murder you. If we go to the police now, she'll have a lawyer in an hour. She'll claim it was an accident. She'll claim I'm confused from the head injury. She'll claim the cutters were for roses." He looked at me. "The prenup voids in 2 days, Dad." 2 days? "If we stay married for 5 years, the prenup voids. She gets half. But if I die, she gets it all. The 75 million, the company, the house, the insurance. So what do we do?" I asked. Michael looked at me. He looked like he did when he was 10 years old, asking me how to fix a broken chain on his bike. "We let her think she won," he said. "We stage the funeral. We let her believe I'm gone. When people think they're safe, they show you who they really are. They get loppy." He gripped my hand harder. I need to know, Dad. I need to know if she ever loved me at all, or if I was just a paycheck to her. I looked at Evans. Can we do this? I can keep him in the private wing, Evans said. I'll falsify the death certificate. I'll put a hold on the morgue transfer. But you only have 3 days. After that, the paperwork catches up to us. 3 days, I said. I looked at my son, broken, battered, but alive. 3 days to catch a shark. The adrenaline of the revelation was fading, replaced by a cold, tactical clarity. We had to move him. The ICU was too exposed, too public. The door to the private room cracked open, just an inch. A woman slipped inside. She moved with a surprising grace for someone of her size. She was formidable, arms like tree trunks, clad in blue scrubs that looked stretched to their limit. Coast is clear, she whispered. Her voice was a deep, resonant cello note that vibrated in the small room. Art, this is Betty, Dr. Evans said, checking the hallway one last time before sealing us in. Head nurse of the ICU. She's the only one I trust. She ran this floor during the blizzard of 11. The generators failed. She doesn't break. Betty didn't offer a hand to shake. She looked at Michael, analyzing the monitors. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly unamused. I saw her, Betty said, cutting through the pleasantries. Where? I asked. In the hallway, by the vending machines. Betty folded her arms, texting and smiling. Miss Miller, I've worked in this ICU for 25 years. I've seen mothers lose sons, wives lose husbands. I know what grief looks like. It looks like collapse. It looks like a building coming down. She gestured toward the door with a tilt of her head. That woman out there. She wasn't grieving. She looked like someone who just found a winning lottery ticket in the gutter, who smiles when their husband is dying. Betty walked over to Michael. Her large hands adjusted his pillow with a tenderness that belied her imposing frame. She checked the IV drip, her movements precise and professional. I'll move him to the quarantined wing on the 4th floor, Betty said. It's closed for renovations. Dust sheets and silence. Nobody goes up there but me. I'll guard the door. Thank you, Betty, Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the room. Don't thank me, honey, she said, her face hardening into a mask of resolve. Just nail that witch. I don't like people making a mockery of my hospital. She looked at me. She thinks she's the predator, Miss Miller. Let's show her she's just lunch. Betty was an army all by herself. The next morning, the sun refused to rise. The sky remained a bruised purple-gray, the rain turning from a deluge into a miserable, freezing mist that clung to your eyelashes. I stood in the main hallway of the hospital, my hands deep in the pockets of my canvas jacket. Sarah was there, pacing. She had changed clothes, a somber charcoal ensemble that looked modest, but probably cost $5,000. Dr. Evans came out of the ICU double doors. He looked shattered. He was a better actor than I gave him credit for. I'm sorry, Evans said, his voice cracking perfectly. He's gone. The silence that followed was heavy, wet, and suffocating. Sarah didn't scream this time. She didn't wail. She gasped. She put a manicured hand to her chest, right over her heart. She staggered back a half step, just enough to look unsteady. I watched her throat. I saw the swallow, and then I heard it. A slow, deep exhale. It wasn't a sigh of despair. It was the sound of a pressure valve releasing. It was the sound of relief. I have to be strong, she said, her voice trembling with a calculated frailty. I have to handle the arrangements. Michael would want dignity. I can help, I said, stepping forward. I can take care of the funeral home. I know the director at O'Malley's. No, she said, too quickly. The mask slipped for a millisecond, revealing the steel beneath. Then she softened it. No, Art. You're grieving. You're his father. You shouldn't have to do the heavy lifting. Go home. Rest. I'll handle everything. I want to give him the best. It's the last thing I can do for him. She touched my arm. Her hand felt like ice. Go home, Art. She left the hospital 20 minutes later. She walked with her head down, playing the part of the grieving widow for the nurses at the station. But the moment she hit the revolving doors, her pace quickened. I didn't go home. I got into my truck and waited. She didn't go to her mother's house to cry. She didn't go to a church. She drove straight to the First National Bank on State Street. I parked 3 spots down, engine idling, watching through the rain-streaked glass. She was inside for 40 minutes. When she walked out, she was clutching a thick, manila envelope against her chest. She wasn't holding it like paperwork. She was holding it like a lifeline. Cash. I watched her get into the Mercedes. Michael's Mercedes. Who needs a brick of cash 10 minutes after their husband dies? Only someone who plans to run. I needed eyes that were younger than mine. I needed technology. I didn't understand. I drove to a small, nondescript office above a bakery on 4th Street. The staircase smelled of yeast, sugar, and 50 years of dust. I pushed open the frosted glass door that read Russo Investigations. The office was a time capsule, filing cabinets overflowing with paper, a ceiling fan that clicked rhythmically, and the smell of stale cigarette smoke warring with the donuts downstairs. Frankie, the shadow Russo, was sitting behind a cluttered desk, dissecting a glazed cruller. Frankie was an old friend. He used to drive long haul for me in the 80s, until a load of timber shifted on I-80 and ruined his L4 vertebrae. He couldn't drive anymore, so he started watching people instead. He was small, wiry, with skin like tanned leather, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Artie," he said, not rising. He knew my knees were as bad as his back. I heard the news on the radio. "I'm sorry, Artie. The kid was a good one." "He's not dead, Frankie," I said, closing the door and locking it. Frankie froze. The donut stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down on a napkin, very carefully. "You want to run that by me again?" he asked, his voice low. I sat in the visitor's chair, wooden, uncomfortable, and told him everything. The phone call, the wire cutters, the fake death, the cash at the bank. Frankie listened without blinking. He cracked his knuckles, a sound like pistol shots in the small room. "She's a black widow, Artie," he said, shaking his head. "I never liked her. Too polished, too shiny, like a car with a fresh paint job hiding a rusted chassis. I need eyes on her, Frankie. I need to know who she's texting. I need to know where that money is going." "Consider it done," Frankie said. He opened a drawer and pulled out a tablet and a strange black box with antennas. "I've got new toys. I can clone her phone if I get within 50 feet of it. I'll tap into her cloud backups. I'll check her offshore accounts." He looked at me, his eyes hard. "If she buys a pack of gum, we'll know the flavor. If she books a flight, we'll know the seat number." The hunt was on, and Frankie was the best bloodhound in the city. I drove to Michael's house in the Gold Coast. Well, her house now. It was a monstrosity of modern architecture, glass, steel, and sharp angles. It looked less like a home and more like an Apple store. I let myself in the spare key Michael had given me years ago, hidden inside a fake rock in the garden. The heavy oak door swung open silently. The house was freezing. The thermostat was set to 62. I walked into the kitchen. It was vast, white, and spotless. I sat on a bar stool that cost more than my first truck. I poured a glass of tap water and waited. Sarah came home an hour later. I heard the garage door rumble open. I heard the click of her heels on the polished concrete of the mudroom. She walked in. She was humming. It was a light, airy tune, a pop song, something happy, humming. Her husband had been dead for 6 hours. When she rounded the corner and saw me sitting in the semi-darkness of the kitchen, she stopped dead. The hum died in her throat, strangled. "Art," she said. Her voice wasn't sad. It was annoyed, like I was a stain on the countertop she hadn't noticed. "How did you get in here? What are you doing?" "I came to feed the dog," I said, my voice flat. "Buster gets anxious when Michael isn't here. He needs his routine." Buster was Michael's golden retriever, a sweet old soul with a white muzzle and hips that gave him trouble in the stairs. He was under the table, thumping his tail weakly when he heard my voice. "Oh, the dog," Sarah said. She wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something rotting. "Yeah, you should take him. Today. Right now." "Take him?" I asked. "This is his home. Not anymore," she said. She walked to the wine fridge, a glass tower of vintage bottles, and pulled out a Chardonnay. It was 11 a.m. "I'm getting the carpets cleaned tomorrow," she said, popping the cork with a practiced twist. "And then, I'm having the decorators in. I can't have that beast shedding everywhere. Besides, I'm thinking of redecorating." The whole rustic look, Michael liked. "It's so dated. It's depressing." She poured the wine, watching the golden liquid swirl. "I want everything white, clean, new." She was erasing it. She wasn't just moving on. She was scrubbing his existence out of the floorboards. "He's Michael's dog," I said, standing up. The rage was building in my chest. A high-pressure system waiting to blow. "He's part of the family. He's 10 years old, Sarah. You can't just throw him out." "He's a nuisance," she snapped, taking a long sip of wine. Her eyes flashed with genuine irritation. "He smells. He drools. Take him, Art, or I'm calling the pound. They can put him down for all I care. One less thing to worry about." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until the facade cracked. But I couldn't. I had to play the beaten old man. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll take him. Good." She leaned against the marble island, swirling her glass. "And Art, leave the key on the counter when you go." "Excuse me?" "The key," she said, pointing a manicured finger at the counter. "I don't want people coming and going. I have expensive things here. I need privacy to grieve. I'm his father," I said. "I built the company that paid for this house." "And I'm his widow," she said coldly. Her eyes were dead sharks. "And as of this morning, I'm the sole owner of this property. Leave the key." I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the silk and the makeup, she was hollow. I whistled for Buster. He struggled to his feet, his claws clicking on the tile. I clipped his leash on. I took the key from my pocket. I placed it gently on the counter. "Don't scratch the floors," I said. Sarah snatched the key up. "Finally!" I walked out with the dog. My blood was boiling so hot I could barely see straight. I was walking to my truck, helping Buster into the passenger seat, when a figure sprinted out from behind the hedgerow. It was a young woman, soaked to the bone, shivering in the cold rain. "Mr. Miller," she gasped. It was Elena, Michael's executive assistant. She was a bright kid, loyal to a fault. Michael treated her like a younger sister. "Lena, what's wrong? What are you doing out here?" She was crying, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "I tried to call you," she sobbed. "I've been waiting here for 2 hours. I didn't want to ring the doorbell." "Calm down," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. She was shaking violently. "What happened?" "She fired me," Elena whispered. "Sarah called me at 8:01 a.m. Before the announcement. She fired me and locked me out of the server." "Why?" "Because I saw the insurance papers," Elena said, fumbling with her purse. Her hands were wet and slippery. 2 days ago I was filing the quarterly reports. I saw a change order on Michael's life insurance policy. She pulled a folded, damp piece of paper from her bag. "She forged his signature, Mr. Miller. She increased the accidental death payout 3 weeks ago. It used to be $5 million. She bumped it to 20. You saw this?" I took the paper. "It was a photocopy." "I made copies," Elena said, wiping her nose. "I made copies before she locked me out. I knew something was wrong. Michael never signs documents without reading them. And the date, he was in Tokyo on that date. He couldn't have signed it. He couldn't have signed it." I looked at the signature. It was a good forgery, but Michael had a specific loop in his M that was missing. "You're a brave girl, Lena," I said, folding the paper and putting it in my inside pocket, next to my heart. "You did good. Is he really gone?" she asked, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. I hesitated. I couldn't tell her yet. It was too dangerous. "Go home, Elena," I said gently. "Lock your doors. Don't talk to anyone. I'll handle this." "She's evil, Mr. Miller," Elena whispered. I looked into her eyes when she fired me. There was nothing there. "I know," I said, opening the truck door. "But even the devil has to pay his debts eventually." I watched her run to her car. The noose was tightening. She had forged the signature. She had cut the brakes. She was clearing the board, but she forgot one thing. The game isn't over until the king falls, and my king was still breathing. The next day, the rain hadn't stopped. It had just changed tempo, shifting from a downpour to a steady rhythmic drumming that sounded like fingers tapping on a coffin lid. I pulled into the lot of O'Malley's funeral home. It was a stately brick building on the edge of the city, a place where the carpets were thick enough to swallow footsteps, and the air always smelled of lilies and formaldehyde, the scent of polite death. I walked into the viewing room. The silence was oppressive. It pressed against my eardrum. Sarah was already there, but she wasn't alone. A man was standing next to her, inspecting the mahogany wainscoting like a prospective buyer. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit that was too shiny, too tight, too modern. His hair was gelled back into a helmet of indifference. "Who is that?" I asked from the doorway, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. Sarah jumped, a nervous twitch she couldn't suppress. "Oh, Art," she said, composing herself. "I didn't hear you come in. This is Gary, my financial advisor." "Advisor?" I stepped closer. I looked at the man. He didn't have the weary posture of a numbers guy. He stood on the balls of his feet, like a boxer or a thief. "Pleasure," Gary said. He didn't offer a hand. He just nodded. He looked at my work boots stained with mud and oil, then up to my face. His lip curled slightly. It was a look I knew well. It was the look of a man who has never had dirt under his fingernails, looking at a man who can't scrub it off. "Rough break. About the kid," Gary said. His voice was smooth, like synthetic oil. "Real tragedy. Young guy like that. Prime of his life." The words felt slimy. They slid often without weight. "I bet you're heartbroken," I said, stepping into his personal space. "I'm 6'2". I spent 40 years lifting lumber. I cast a long shadow. Gary didn't back down, but he blinked. "I'm just here to help Sarah with the asset." Liquidity is important during a transition. Transition, not a death. A transition, like moving money from one account to another. Assets. That's all my son was to them. A portfolio to be liquidated. Gary turned away from me, dismissing me as a threat. He walked over to the fireplace mantel where a few of Michael's personal effects were displayed, a photo of him fishing, his wedding ring, and his watchbox. Michael had a collection, but there was one piece that mattered. A vintage Patek Philippe, 1952. My father bought it when he returned from Korea. I gave it to Michael when he graduated college. It wasn't just gold and gears. It was history. Gary picked it up. "Nice," he murmured. He weighed it in his hand. "Heavy. Is this the Patek?" "The reference?" "Yeah," Sarah said, looking at her phone, bored. "Take it." The air in the room vanished. "What?" I stepped forward, my voice dropping an octave. "That was my father's watch. I gave it to Michael. It's a family heirloom. It's an asset," Sarah said, not looking up. "Gary is going to appraise it for the estate taxes. We need a valuation." Gary smiled. It was a wolf's smile. He unclasped the leather strap and slipped the watch onto his own wrist. He held it up to the light, admiring the sweep of the second hand. "Fits perfect," he said, "like it was made for me." The rage that hit me was blinding. It was a physical blow. I felt the muscles in my neck cock up. I imagined grabbing his wrist and snapping it like a dry twig. "Take it off," I warned. My fists were clenched so hard my fingernails bit into my palms. "Back off, old man," Gary said. He stepped closer, puffing his chest out. He was 20 years younger than me, gym-fit, arrogant. But he was soft. He had muscles built for mirrors, not for work. "You're upset. You're confused. Don't make a scene." I took a step. I was going to hit him. I was going to lay him out right there on the funeral home carpet. "Let him have it, Art," Sarah cut in, her voice sharp. "Don't be petty. It's just a watch. Gary needs to take it to the vault." I stopped. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. If I hit him now, the police come. I get arrested for assault. I lose access. I lose the game. Michael needed me smart, not violent. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like bile. Appraise it. But be careful. It's old. It stops if you don't treat it right. Gary smirked and adjusted his cuff over the watch. Don't worry, Pops. I know how to handle quality. You're wearing a dead man's time, I thought, and your time is running out. I walked out to the parking lot before I did something I couldn't undo. The cold air slapped my face, grounding me. My phone buzzed against my thigh. It was Frankie. Talk to me, I said, climbing into the cab of my truck. Arch, you need to pull over if you're driving, Frankie said. His voice was tight with excitement. I'm parked. What did you find? I ran a deep background on Gary. The guy in the suit? His name isn't Gary Wilson. Who is he? His name is Gary Vance. He's a grifter, Art. A high-end con man. I found 2 warrants in Florida for insurance fraud and 1 in Arizona for identity theft. Does Sarah know? No, Frankie laughed. A harsh barking sound. Art, she's not a victim. She's his partner. They pulled the same scam in Texas 5 years ago. A rancher named Epistolary. He married a Susan. That's Sarah's alias. 6 months later, he fell off his boat in the Gulf. Body never found. My skin crawled. It felt like ants were moving under my clothes. She killed him, I whispered. She killed the rancher. They split the life insurance, Frankie said. $2 million. They blew through it in 3 years. Now they're in Chicago, looking for a bigger payday. And they found Michael. We have to stop them, Frankie. We have to go to the cops. With what? Frankie asked. Warrants in other states don't prove murder here. We need hard evidence linking them to the sabotage. We need the smoking gun. I might have the bullet, I said. Where's the car? That's the other thing, Frankie said. I tracked the tow order. It didn't go to the impound lot like it should have. Sarah signed a private disposal order. Disposal? She sent it to a scrapyard on the south side. Iron City Recycling. They're trying to crush it, Art. Today, I'm on my way. I slammed the truck into gear. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt. Iron City Recycling was a graveyard of metal, mountains of rusted washing machines. Twisted rebar and crushed sedans rose like jagged peaks against the gray sky. The noise was deafening. The shriek of metal on metal, the roar of diesel engines, the thud of the magnetic crane. I drove through the mud, dodging puddles the size of lakes. I saw the Porsche. It was barely recognizable. The sleek German engineering was reduced to a crumpled ball of silver foil. The front end was non-existent. The roof was caved in. It was a miracle, a genuine act of God, that Michael had been pulled out of that wreck in one piece. A tow truck was backing up to it. A massive hydraulic claw was swinging overhead, ready to drop. Hey, I yelled, jumping out of my truck while it was still rolling. Stop! Cut the engine! I ran through the mud, waving my arms. The operator, a giant man in greasy coveralls holding a wrench the size of his forearm, looked down from the rig. Get out of the way, old man, he shouted over the noise. Restricted area. That's my son's car, I screamed, pointing at the wreck. It's evidence. The man climbed down. He wiped his hands on a rag that was black with grease. He chewed on a toothpick, looking me up and down. I got a work order, he grunted. Tapping a clipboard. Urgent disposal. Crush and cube. No questions asked. Signed by the owner, Sarah Miller. She's trying to destroy the evidence, I said, stepping closer. Look at the brake lines. Just look at them. I don't get paid to look, the man said. I get paid to crush. Move your truck or I'll crush that too. He turned back to the crane. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my wallet. I didn't have much. My pension wasn't huge. But I had the emergency cash I kept for breakdowns. 500, I said, holding out the bills. 500 cash. Just to leave it alone for 24 hours. The man stopped. He looked at the cash. He looked at the rain soaking into his boots. 500 buys you 10 minutes, he sneered. Make it 1,000, I said, and I'll throw in a case of scotch. He paused. He looked at the car. It was just scrap to him. But $1,000 was rent. Gave him 1,000 now, he said, and get it off my lot by tomorrow night. If it's here Friday morning, it's a cube. I handed him the money. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. Don't touch it, I said. Frankie is coming with a flatbed. He's going to take photos of the undercarriage. Money talks, but evidence screams. And that car was screaming murder. I went back to the mansion. I had to play the part. I had to be the defeated father, the nuisance. Sarah and Gary were in the living room. They were laughing. They had a map spread out on the coffee table. When I walked in, Gary swept the map off the table in one smooth motion. "I'm leaving," I said, standing in the foyer. "I can't be here." "Good," Sarah said. She was drinking champagne now. "Wait, the lake house keys. I know you have a set. Why do you need the lake house?" "It's November. The pipes are drained. It's freezing up there." "I'm hosting a wake there," she said, exchanging a glance with Gary, "for close friends. Next weekend. Something private. Away from the press." "A wake?" I asked. "A celebration of life," Gary corrected, smiling that oily smile. Closure. I knew exactly what it was. It was a victory party. They wanted to go to the lake house, secluded miles from neighbors, to celebrate their windfall, to plan their next move. "Give me the keys, Art," Sarah demanded, holding out her hand. Her nails were painted blood red. I dug them out of my pocket. The brass keys clinked together. That cabin was where Michael took his first steps. It was where I taught him to fish. I threw them on the table. They slid across the polished wood and stopped at the edge. "Don't scratch the floors," I said. Sarah snatched them up. Finally, she turned to Gary, ignoring me completely. "Monday," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. 75 million clears. We need to be ready." "You sure the old man doesn't suspect?" Gary asked, jerking his head toward me as I turned to the door. "Art?" She laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Look at him. He's a grease monkey. He thinks with a wrench. He has no idea. He's probably going home to cry into a beer." I walked out the door. I let it latch softly behind me. Let them think I was stupid. Let them think I was broken. A broken machine is the one you stop paying attention to right before it blows up in your face. That night I met Frankie in his van, parked 2 blocks away from the mansion. The rain was finally stopping, leaving a thick, clinging fog.
"Did you get in?"
I asked. "Easy," Frankie said. He handed me a headset. I posed as the carpet cleaner she hired. Spotless Steve. I planted bugs in the living room, the kitchen, and the master bedroom. High-gain audio. We can hear them breathing. He pointed to the recording equipment at the back of the van. The reels were turning slowly. "Put them on." I put the headphones over my ears. The static hissed for a moment, then cleared. The sound was crystal clear. It was like they were sitting next to me. "I can't wait to leave this dump," Sarah's voice said. I could hear the clink of glass. "I hate Chicago. I hate the rain. I hate his stupid friends. Rio is going to be nice." Gary's voice replied, "Did you transfer the funds?" "I tried," Sarah said. "The bank said there's a 48-hour hold, some security check for transactions over 10 million. Standard procedure." "Damn it," Gary swore. "We need to be on that plane Monday night. If the SEC starts sniffing around." "Don't worry," Sarah soothed him. "The funeral is Thursday. Once he's in the ground, the death certificate is official. I become the sole beneficiary. Nothing can stop us then. We get the payout, we dump the stock, and we vanish." There was a pause, then a sound that made my blood freeze. They were kissing, wet, sloppy sounds of celebration. "To Michael," Gary laughed. "The best investment we ever made." "To the brakes," Sarah giggled. "And the idiot who didn't check them." I ripped the headphones off. I threw them onto the dashboard. "They're running," I said, staring out at the fog. "They're going to cash out on Monday and disappear." "Not if we catch them first," Frankie said. "We have the confession on tape. It's circumstantial, but it helps." "It's not enough," I said. "We need them to say it in public. We need them to break." I looked at the dark silhouette of the mansion down the street. "Thursday," I said. "The funeral? What are you thinking, Art?" Frankie asked, looking at my face. "I'm thinking about ghosts," I said. "I'm thinking about haunting them." Wednesday night, the hospital felt different. After hours, less like a place of healing and more like a machine in standby mode. The hum of ventilation was louder, the lights harsher. I met Dr. Evans at the service elevator in the basement. It was the loading dock entrance, usually reserved for laundry deliveries, in the coroner's van. "He's ready," Evans said. He looked nervous, checking his watch. "The shift change is in 10 minutes. The loading dock is empty." The elevator doors opened. Michael was in a wheelchair, wearing a dark suit that hung loosely on his frame. He looked pale, almost translucent, under the fluorescent buzz. The bruising on his face had deepened to a sickening shade of violet and charcoal. "Michael," I said, stepping forward. "Dad," he whispered. He tried to smile, but his split lip made it a grimace. "We have to move fast," Frankie said, emerging from the shadows of the loading bay. He had backed his unmarked van up to the ramp. "We're smuggling a dead man out of a hospital. If security sees this, we're all going to jail." We helped Michael into the back of the van. He groaned as his broken ribs shifted. Every movement was a negotiation with pain. I gave him a mild sedative, Evans told me, handing me a small vial. "For tomorrow, it will lower his heart rate and respiration. He'll look dead enough for an open casket, but he'll be conscious. He just needs to stay perfectly still." "I can do it," Michael said, his voice steel. "I've been practicing holding my breath." "Why the suit?" I asked, looking at his attire. "Because," Michael said, looking at his reflection in the van's dark window, "I want to be dressed for the occasion. I'm attending my own funeral." As we drove away, the rain began to fall again. It felt like the city was weeping for us. "She gave Gary Grandpa's watch," I told him, breaking the silence in the van. I had to tell him. I needed his anger to be hotter than his pain. Michael stared at the wall of the van. He didn't blink. "And she forged the insurance," I added. "Elena gave me the proof. She upped the policy to 20 million. Michael closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the bruise on his cheek. "She planned it," he whispered. "Every kiss. Every 'I love you.' Every time she held my hand, she was just checking for a pulse. She couldn't wait to stop. It was all just math to her." He opened his eyes. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying emptiness. "Is the box ready?" he asked. "The casket is wired," I said. "I spent all afternoon on it. Microphones in the silk lining. High, gain, directional mics. Speakers hidden in the flower arrangements at the base. I have the remote in my pocket. When you speak, God himself will hear you." "Good," Michael said. He leaned his head back against the metal wall of the van. "Let's go to church. Thursday morning, the day of the funeral." The sky was a slate-gray sheet of iron. The rain was relentless, turning the gutters of the St. Jude Cathedral into rushing rivers. The church was an imposing Gothic structure, all gargoyles and dark stone, looming over the neighborhood like a judgment. I stood outside under the stone archway, checking the perimeter with Frankie. We were wet, cold, and running on 3 hours of sleep. "Crowd is arriving," Frankie muttered, adjusting his earpiece. "Lots of suits, tech people, construction guys. Your son made a lot of friends, Art." A woman walked up the stone steps. She stood out against the sea of black designer coats. She looked rough, worn down by a life that hadn't been kind. She wore a cheap, synthetic coat that was too thin for the weather, and scuffed shoes. A cigarette burned between her fingers, the smoke mixing with the rain. "Is this the Miller funeral?" she asked. Her voice was like sandpaper. "Who are you?" I asked, stepping in her path. We couldn't afford surprises. "I'm Martha," she said, flicking ash onto the wet stairs. "Sarah's aunt." "Sarah said she didn't have family," I said. "She said she was an orphan." Martha laughed. It sounded like a bark, devoid of humor. "She has plenty of family. She just owes us all money. She ghosted us 10 years ago." Martha looked at the poster of Michael near the door, a smiling photo from better days. "She goes by Sarah now?" Martha asked, shaking her head. "Her name is Susan Riggins." The name landed like a heavy stone. "Susan Riggin?" "She did this in Texas 5 years ago," Martha said, taking a long drag. "Married a cattle rancher named Boone. Nice guy. Dumb as a post. My blood ran cold. The story Frankie found. It was true. What happened to him? He fell off a horse, Martha said. Broke his neck in a ravine. No witnesses. Sarah cashed out $2 million in life insurance and vanished before the dirt was settled on his grave. She looked me in the eye. I saw the obituary in the paper. Recognized the photo of her. I came to warn you, but I guess I'm too late for your boy. Maybe not, I said. Stick around, Martha. You might want to see the second act. We wasn't just catching a murderer. We were catching a serial killer. A predator who moved from state to state, leaving bodies and empty bank accounts in her wake. The sanctuary of St. Jude was vast. The air smelled of beeswax, wet wool, and ancient incense. It was packed. 500 people filled the pews. Construction workers in their Sunday best, tech executives, in Italian suits, neighbors from the old block. Michael lay in the open casket at the front of the altar. It was a terrifying sight. He looked dead. His skin was waxy, his chest barely moving under the expertly tailored suit. Dr. Evans had done his job well. The sedative held him in a twilight state, hovering between wakefulness and sleep. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoed on the marble. I felt like I was walking to the gallows. I sat in the front row, reserved for immediate family. Sarah sat to me. She was a vision of curated grief. She wore a black dress that was modest but cut to flatter, a veil that obscured her eyes just enough to hide the lack of tears. She held a handkerchief that she never used. "Art," she whispered, acknowledging me without turning her head. "Sarah," she smelled of that expensive floral perfume again. It made me nauseous. Gary was sitting 2 rows back, directly behind us. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck. I glanced back. He was trying to look somber, but his foot was tapping a nervous rhythm. He was wearing the Patek Philippe. It glinted under the cathedral lights. The audacity of these people. They were dancing on the grave before the dirt was even thrown. I checked my pocket. The remote control for the audio system was there, heavy and cold. The service began. The organ music swelled, shaking the dust from the rafters. The priest, Father Thomas, began to speak about the fragility of life, about Michael's kindness, his generosity. He was a builder, Father Thomas said, his voice booming, a man who built bridges between people. Sarah sighed. It was a loud, exasperated sound. She leaned over to me, under the cover of a hymn. "Is this almost over?" she whispered. Her voice was sharp and patient. "I have a reservation at Le Monde for the reception. They won't hold the VIP room past 1 o'clock. If we're late, we lose the deposit." My hands shook. I gripped the pew in front of me to keep from strangling her. "We are burying my son," I whispered back, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Have some respect. Keep your voice down," she hissed, checking her makeup in the reflection of her phone screen. "You're embarrassing me. Just sit there and look sad, Art." "It's not hard. It's not hard." She checked her phone again. A text from Gary. I saw the screen. "Funds clear Monday. Rio tickets booked." She typed back. "Almost done. Then we're free." Finally, it was time for the family. Goodbye. The last viewing before they closed the lid. I went first. I stood over the casket. I looked down at my son. His eyes were closed, his breathing so shallow it was invisible. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I squeezed it hard. I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch in his muscle. He was there. He was listening. "Showtime, kid," I whispered. "Give him hell." I walked back to my seat. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was clear. Now it was her turn. Sarah stood up. She smoothed her dress, checking the lines. She took a deep breath, not to steady herself, but to prepare for the performance. She walked to the casket. Click, click, click. Her heels on the marble were the only sound in the massive room. She reached the altar. She turned to the crowd for a split second, giving them a tragic, tear-filled look. A masterclass in deception. Then she turned to Michael. She leaned in close, over the open casket. She placed her hands on the silk lining, posing as the grieving widow, saying her final, private farewell. She thought she was whispering. She thought the music and the distance protected her. She thought she was alone with the dead. But she wasn't. I reached into my pocket. My thumb found the wheel on the remote. I turned the gain on the microphones to maximum. I unmuted the hidden speakers in the flower arrangements. Her voice, amplified to concert volume, boomed through the cathedral. It hit the stone walls and bounced back, louder than the organ. "I'm going to spend every dime," she hissed. The clarity was terrifying. You could hear the venom in her throat. "I'll blow your millions on yachts and mansions. You were so pathetic. You were so easy to kill." The sound hit the room like a physical bomb. The organist stopped mid-chord. The weeping in the pews ceased instantly. 500 people froze, their brains trying to process what they just heard. Sarah pulled back, confused. She looked around. She heard the echo, her own voice shouting about murder, but she couldn't locate the source. She thought maybe it was in her head. "What?" she muttered, looking at the priest. She looked down at Michael, her face twisted into a sneer of pure contempt. "At least you're finally quiet," she whispered again. And again, the speakers broadcast it to the rafters. "At least you're finally quiet." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Sarah froze. She realized the sound was coming from everywhere. And then it happened. Heh, a sound from the coffin. It wasn't the sound of the dead. It was a dry, dusty chuckle, low and guttural. Sarah jumped back as if the casket was electrified. "What? Heh, heh." The chuckle grew louder. It rippled through the microphones. It wasn't a nice laugh. It wasn't Michael's usual warm belly laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had stared into the abyss and found it ridiculous. It was the laugh of judgment. Sarah's face turned the color of old paper. She grabbed the edge of the coffin to steady herself, her knuckles white. Did you hear that?" she shrieked, spinning around to face the priest. "Hear what, my child?" Father Thomas asked, his eyes wide with terror. He was backing away toward the altar. "He laughed," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He laughed at me." She looked back at the coffin, her eyes bulging. "Michael?" The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The tension in the room was a physical weight. It was the moment before the bridge snaps. The moment before the cable shears snap. The silence in St. Jude's was no longer the silence of reverence. It was the silence of a held breath, of 500 minds trying to reconcile the impossible. Then the impossible moved. Michael's eyes didn't just open. They snapped wide. Under the harsh altar lights, his pupils were pinpricks of black obsidian. Sarah screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise. It was a primal, tearing sound that scraped against the high-vaulted ceilings. It was the sound of a psyche fracturing. She stumbled back, her designer heels catching on the plush runner carpet. She fell hard, scrambling backward on her hands and heels, kicking at the air as if warding off a demon. "Ghost!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into hysteria. "Stay away! You're dead! I saw you. I saw the body." Michael sat up. It wasn't a fluid motion. It was jagged, painful. The sedative fought him, and his broken ribs protested. He groaned, a low, distorted sound amplified by the hidden speakers until it sounded like the earth shifting. He gripped the satin-lined edges of the casket, his knuckles white, and hauled himself upright. To the crowd, he looked like Lazarus rising. To me, he looked like a man fighting through an ocean of pain to deliver a message. He turned his head, his neck cracked audibly. He looked out at the sea of terrified faces. My brother Joe, a man who had worked steel mills for 30 years, went gray and slumped sideways in the third row, out cold. People were standing, gasping, clutching rosers. Michael ignored them all. He locked eyes with Sarah, who was now cowering against the first pew, trembling so violently her ruler rattled. "Hello, honey," Michael said. His voice didn't come from his throat. It came from everywhere. The speakers in the flowers, the subwoofers near the choir loft. It surrounded her. No, she covered her face with her hands, peering through her fingers like a child. "You died? Evans said you died." "I got better," Michael said. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. The church erupted. It wasn't applause, it was chaos. A low roar of confusion and terror that shook the stained glass windows. Michael didn't stop. He swung his legs over the side of the casket. He placed his feet on the marble step. He stood up. He swayed for a moment, dizzy, but he locked his knees and stayed upright. He towered over her. Sarah looked at him, and then she looked at the crowd. Her survival instinct, that reptilian part of her brain that had kept her one step ahead of the law for a decade, kicked in. She realized he wasn't a ghost. He was flesh and blood, and that was infinitely worse. She scrambled to her feet, her face flushing from pale terror to crimson rage. You set me up," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at him. Her fear transmuted instantly into indignation. "This is fraud. You faked your death. That's illegal. I'll sue you." The audacity was breathtaking. She was cornered, caught in a lie so big it filled the room, and she was threatening to sue. "You just confessed to murder, Sarah," Michael said calmly. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out the small lapel microphone he had been wearing. He tapped it. Thump, thump. The sound was like a heartbeat in the sanctuary. On a live mic, in front of 500 witnesses, including the mayor and the chief of police. Sarah's eyes darted around the room. She saw the faces, shocked, disgusted, angry. She tried to pivot. She tried to gaslight the entire congregation. "I didn't mean it," she yelled, her voice shrill. It was grief. It was a figure of speech. I was hysterical. I blamed myself." "A figure of speech?" Michael asked, taking a step down the altar stairs. "Did you buy the wire cutters as a figure of speech, too?" Sarah froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "We found them," Michael said, his voice hard as granite. "In the ravine where I almost died, we found the shavings from my brake lines on the blade, and we found your fingerprints etched into the rubber handles." "No," she whispered. "I wore glue." She stopped herself. She clamped her mouth shut. "You wore gloves?" Michael finished for her, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you were going to say?" She looked wildly for an exit. She looked for Gary. Gary was 3 rows back, near the side aisle. He was frozen, half risen from his pew. When Sarah's eyes met his, the connection broke. He didn't offer help. He turned and bolted toward the east exit. "Gary!" she screamed, a desperate wailing sound. "Gary, help me. Don't leave me." Gary didn't look back. He shoved past a crying elderly woman, sprinting for the door. "He's leaving you," Michael said, watching the coward run. "Just like you tried to leave me, but he won't get far." Sarah turned back to Michael. The mask was completely gone now. The polished socialite, the grieving widow, the loving wife, they all dissolved. What was left was the raw, ugly core of a narcissist denied her prize. "I hate you," she hissed, spitting the words. She looked like a cornered rat baring her teeth. "I always hated you. You were boring. You were weak. I only married you for the money. I counted the days, Michael. Every single day was torture." "I know," Michael said softly. "I know now. I should have used poison," she screamed, losing all control. "I should have done it myself. You stupid, pathetic little man. I deserved that money. I earned it dealing with you and your dirty blue-collar family." "The money stays with me," Michael said, "and the house and the company." The heavy oak doors at the back of the church banged open. The sound was like a gunshot. The storm outside swirled into the vestibule, bringing with it a gust of cold, wet wind. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, rain dripping from their brimmed hats. But they weren't alone. A big man in a rumpled beige trench coat stepped through the center doors. He looked like he was carved out of the same stone as the cathedral. Detective Kowalski. I had known him for 20 years. He was the kind of cop who didn't believe in gray areas. He walked down the center aisle, his heavy boots echoing. He didn't rush. He walked with the inevitability of a glacier. Gary ran straight into the arms of 2 officers waiting at the side exit. We heard the scuffle, the shout of "Get off me," and the metallic snick of handcuffs. Kowalski stopped at the altar step. He looked at Michael and nodded once, a gesture of respect. Then he turned to Sarah. "Sarah Miller," Kowalski said, his voice booming without a microphone. Or should I say Susan Riggins? Sarah flinched as if he had slapped her. You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Michael Miller, Kowalski continued, pulling a pair of steel cuffs from his belt. And for the murder of Boone Riggins in Texas. We got the extradition order this morning. Sarah looked at the cops. She looked at Michael. She looked at me. She looked at the empty air where her future used to be. The yachts were gone. The mansions were gone. The Rio tickets were ash. This is a mistake, she whispered, backing away until she hit the wood of the casket. I have rights. I want my lawyer. A sharp, clear voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. I'm resigning. Veronica, Sarah's high-priced defense attorney, stepped out from the shadows of the choir alcove. She was holding her briefcase like a shield. She looked pale. She had heard the confession. She had heard the threat of the wire cutters. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. I don't represent murderers, Veronica said loudly, making sure the press in the back row heard her. And I certainly don't represent clients who confess on audio tape in front of 500 witnesses. You're on your own, Sarah. Veronica turned on her heel and walked out, the click of her heels sounding like a countdown. Sarah was truly alone. The isolation hit her. She looked at me, sitting in the front row. Her eyes went wide, pleading. She reached out a hand. Art, she cried.
Art, do something. The Ware family were my father-in-law. Help me.
I stood up slowly. My knees popped. I felt every year of my age, but I felt strong. I looked at the woman who had tried to kill my boy. I looked at the woman who had treated me like furniture for 5 years. You're not family, I said, my voice carrying to the back of the church. You're just a bad investment. Kowalski stepped forward. He spun her around. She tried to fight, clawing at his coat, but he clamped the cuffs onto her wrists. Click, click. As they dragged her down the aisle, the veneer of sanity finally cracked completely. She wasn't crying. She was cursing. You old fool, she screamed at me, straining against the officer's grip. You ruined everything. I had it. I had it all. She looked at Michael standing by his own coffin. You should have died, she shrieked. Why didn't you just die? I watched her go. I just smiled. A small, tired, satisfied smile. You did that yourself, darling, I said to her, retreating back. You forgot to check the structural integrity before you applied the load. The doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her screams. The church was silent again, but this time it was a clean silence. The silence after a storm. The church cleared out slowly. The shock had made the congregation sluggish, like oil in winter. People whispered, glancing back at the altar where the dead man stood, before shuffling out into the wet afternoon. I walked out the side door, into the alleyway where the dumpster stood. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet brick and ozone. Frankie was there. He had Gary pinned against the rough brick wall of the rectory. Gary looked small now. His expensive Italian suit was soaked and muddied at the knees, from where the officers had tackled him. Found this rat trying to hotwire a Honda Civic, Frankie said, lighting a cigarette with a steady hand. His own car was blocked in by the paddy wagon. Can you believe it? A finance guy trying to steal a rusty Civic. Gary looked at me. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving only a shivering, pathetic fear. Art, he stammered. Art, listen, I was just the accountant. She made me do it. She's crazy. I can testify against her. I can cut a deal. You're not a witness, Gary, I said, stepping closer. You're the co-pilot. Nice watch, Frankie said, blowing smoke into the cold air. He reached out, grabbed Gary's wrist, and twisted. Gary yelped. Frankie unclasped the Patek Philippe with a deft, practiced movement. He slid it off Gary's wrist. It doesn't suit you, Frankie said. You have weak wrists. Frankie tossed the watch to me. I caught it. It felt heavy in my palm. Heavier than metal and glass should be. It felt like 70 years of history. It was warm from Gary's skin, which made my stomach turn, but I wiped it on my flannel shirt until the taint was gone. Take him away, Detective Kowalski said, stepping out from the shadows. 2 uniformed officers grabbed Gary by the arms and dragged him toward the waiting cruiser. Gary started to cry. Not the dignified weeping of a penitent man, but the high-pitched sobbing of a child who realized the game was over. Tell Michael I'm sorry, Gary shouted as they shoved him into the back seat. Save it for the judge, Frankie muttered. He looked at me and winked. I'm gonna go get a donut. Good job, Artie. An hour later, the church was empty. The police had finished their preliminary statement. The press had been corralled outside the gates. It was just me and Michael, sitting on the marble steps of the altar. The empty coffin loomed behind us, a silk-lined box waiting for a tenant who wasn't coming. The smell of the flowers, thousands of dollars worth of lilies, was suffocatingly sweet. Michael looked exhausted. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. His shoulders slumped, and his face was gray. He looked like a building that had survived an earthquake but was showing deep structural cracks. "We okay, son?" I asked, my voice echoing in the vast silent space. Michael stared at his hands. "I loved her, Dad," he said softly. The confession hung in the air. "I know," I said. "That's what made the trap work. She counted on that love to blind you, but you used it to see." "Did you hear what she said? About the money?" "I heard. I really thought—" Michael paused, swallowing hard. "I really thought that maybe, deep down, a part of her would be sad. Even just a little bit. Even just for a second." I put a hand on his knee. "Greed doesn't leave room for sadness, Michael. It's a parasite. It eats everything else. Love, empathy, memory. By the end, she wasn't a wife. She was just a hunger with a pretty face." He nodded slowly. He looked down at his left wrist. It was bare. The pale strip of skin where his watch used to be stood out against his tan. "She took my watch," he said, his voice cracking. "That was the only thing I really cared about in that house. Everything else, the furniture, the art, she bought all that, but the watch was yours." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the Patek. The gold caught the dim light of the church candles. "Here," I said, pressing it into his hand, "right where it belongs." Michael looked at the watch. He ran his thumb over the crystal. He wound the stem, a small mechanical click, 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 click that sounded like order returning to the universe. He clasped it onto his wrist. He took a deep breath. "It's ticking," he said. "Yeah," I smiled. "It keeps good time, just like us." Michael looked at me, and for the first time in 3 days, the shadow left his eyes. He smiled. It was a real smile, tired, bruised, but genuine. "I'm hungry," Michael said suddenly. The realization seemed to surprise him. "You haven't eaten in 3 days," I said. "I've fluids don't count." "I don't want anything fancy," Michael said, standing up and wincing as his ribs stretched. "I don't want foam or reduction or microgreens. I want a burger. A burger, a greasy, cheap, artery-clogging burger, with grilled onions, and a milkshake that's too thick to drink through a straw."
Sounds.
I said. Michael grinned. "Sal's. That place is a health hazard," I grumbled, standing up to join him. "Last time I ate there, I didn't sleep for 2 days." "Exactly," Michael said. "I want to feel alive. Indigestion feels like life." I offered him my arm. He took it. He leaned on me, heavy and warm. "Let's go," I said. "I'm driving." "Not the truck," Michael groaned, feigning horror. "Dad, the suspension on that thing is non-existent. My ribs will shatter." "Too bad," I said, leading him down the aisle toward the light. "The truck is the only thing I trust right now. It's got 300,000 miles on it, and it's never lied to me once." We walked out into the afternoon. The storm had broken completely. The clouds were peeling back, revealing a stripe of pale, cold blue sky to the west. The city looked scrubbed clean. The grime of the streets was washed into the sewers, along with Sarah, Gary, and the lies they told. We climbed into my Ford. The cab smelled of old coffee and diesel. The smell of safety. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a familiar, throaty rumble. I pulled out of the church lot, leaving the Gold Coast behind. We drove past the mansions with their iron gates and silent windows. We drove toward the south side, toward the brick bungalows and the diners and the places where people worked with their hands. Michael rolled down the window. He let the cold air hit his face. He closed his eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, Mike. Thanks." "For what?" "For catching me," he said. When I fell, I gripped the steering wheel. My throat felt tight. Any time, kid. That's the job. I'm the structural support. What do I do now? He asked, looking at the road ahead. The house, the company, it's all tainted. You rebuild, I said. You strip it down to the studs. You tear out the rot. You keep the foundation because the foundation is good. You're the foundation, Michael. You and me. He nodded, watching the city roll by. I think I'm going to sell the house, he said. Buy a place with a yard. Get Buster a friend. Sounds like a plan, I said. Maybe something with a garage. We can work on the '68 Mustang. I'd like that, he said. We pulled into the lot at Sal's. The neon sign was buzzing, a beacon of grease and comfort in the twilight. I put the truck in park. The engine shuddered and fell silent. For a moment, we just sat there. 2 men in a truck, battered by the storm, but still breathing. The sharks were in the cage. The money was safe. But more importantly, the family was safe. I looked at my son. He wasn't the polished CEO anymore. He was just Michael. He was bruised. He was tired. And he was grieving the life he thought he had. But he was alive. Ready? I asked. Yeah, Michael said, opening the door. I'm starving. We walked into the diner together. The bell on the door chimed. The waitress yelled a greeting. The coffee smelled like burnt heaven. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where we were going. We were going forward, 1 mile at a time. Thank you for reading the full saga of The Gray Tuesday. If you felt the weight of that ending, please like and subscribe. We explored betrayal, justice, and the unbreakable bond of family. Let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven her, or would you have set the trap? Until next time.